The I-80 Club +1, and so happy this week, just a couple days ahead of Nebraska in Indiana, to welcome onto the podcast for the first time Kyle Robbins. He has been an Indiana fan for as long as I've been connected with him, and I imagine it's many, many years before that. Kyle, thanks for joining us in the I-80 Club today. How are you?
Yeah, what's going on, Josh? I'm excited to be here. I am jacked up for a big noon kickoff. And in Bloomington, obviously, heck of a start to the season for the Hoosiers. Still riding high. I enjoy that I don't have to put on like any sort of objective face anymore. I can just enjoy things, be a fan. So it's been fun. But yeah, let's get it going.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you because I first got connected with you many, many years ago. You came on my radio show to talk about golf majors. We would bring you on 4 times a year, which is what we do in Omaha, Nebraska. We talk golf 4 times a year. But then I stumbled upon some of your Indiana stuff. You worked for the SB Nation site that covered Indiana. So I wanted to ask you, how enjoyable is it to not have to view everything through the lens of writing and reporting or whatever you did versus just going all in on fandom? It has to be so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, like Josh, I think you know what this is like, right? But like even when, I grew up, for anybody that hasn't followed me, like I grew up just outside Bloomington, Indiana. I was going to Indiana football games in particular when I was 3 to 4 years old. And then my day job, as we were just talking about, has never been journalism, but that was what I was formally trained in, and I've always kind of done it on the side. Ran Crimson Quarry for a long time, and then covered golf for SB Nation. Fun, great opportunity. But you're always, when you have a day job that like pays your bills, and then you're also doing this on the side of kind of chasing the dream, you're on all the time. And like Indiana football in particular has been the thing that I have loved like a 3-legged dog for a long time. And the first team that I really fell in love with in my youth, probably at the time that like you're starting to really know what's going on in the sports world. Like I was in love with stuff before, but like Antoine Randall's freshman year was like, that's 97, 98. Like when I first start to really understand and know what's going on and can follow things and develop bad opinions, right? So I was running around Indiana at that age, and like it's always been something for me that I've really looked forward to. Gets me through the fall. I'm a runner like you. We talk about that all the time. I hate winter. I hate fall. And the thing, once it starts getting cooler, so the thing that keeps you going through the week is, hey, Indiana football on Saturday. And it's been fun this season in particular to just be able, it's the first time that they've been good that I've been able to sit back and not have to write a recap on Saturday after the game or worry about getting a post up on Sunday or, driving the takes online, like having to have something to say. It's like, I don't know, man, like it's nice to grow out of that and just be able to sit back, enjoy what's going on and not have to, milk the content mill for every little thing that happens all the time. That rat race gets old. So.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because there are a lot of people around here where Nebraska is obviously a football school, but I know people that like the basketball team more than they like the football team. Are you that way? Are you the inverse where at the basketball school you like the football program more than the basketball program?
I mean, don't get me wrong. If Indiana basketball wins a national title, I'll be the first guy naked running down my street. But I think most Nebraska fans can probably relate to this in the inverse. Just yesterday, there was a whole meltdown on the internet about Indiana basketball because there is a rumor that Indiana basketball may not land a specific recruit from down the road right in Indiana. May not even likely, but there are posts and rumors on message boards and Discord chats that the kid may not come to Indiana. So everybody was in a meltdown about Mike Woodson. It's October, Josh. Like, the insanity of the end of last Indiana basketball season. I won't start to go into it for Nebraska folks, but you had basically a fervor that was spun up about Mike Woodson that was just all cooked up BS through board of trustee members, through paid site writers, through just the underbelly of what we all sometimes pay $9.99 a month before, sometimes it's just whatever muck is out there. Like the discourse is awful. Like it's unenjoyable. And as somebody that had to write about Indiana basketball in particular through the Tom Crean era, and like for the last 25 years, it's just been exhausting. It's exhausting to follow. It's not fun. And when Indiana basketball is good, and go back to like really, really good in expectations, you go back to 2013. So that was Cody Zeller, Victor Oladipo, that team. I was a nervous wreck the whole year, and I wasn't even old then. Like that was my senior year of college. And I was a nervous wreck. Games weren't fun. Games weren't enjoyable. And it was like you were waiting for the shoe to drop all year. Now there's been some bright spots in the middle of that, like the 2016 team and other things of that nature. But like in Indiana for a decade plus, we've been living in just coaching discourse all the time. And it's always a referendum on everything that Indiana basketball is and every time you have a game. You know what Indiana football is? Just fun. Just fun. No expectations. And if the part of the fan base that drives that in basketball, I want them to start caring about football. But my God, do not bring that shit with you. Leave that on leave that on Pigs. Leave that part of your brain over there, because my God, we've had fun on this side, maybe going 6-6 once in a while. We need to raise the expectation, but don't bring the insanity with it. So I'm sure that's what a lot of probably Nebraska basketball fans feel. It's like, hey, this is all fun, man. This is all fun. All net gain. And my God, I know how much Nebraska basketball has caused pain on the other side of things for me. So like, it's nice to just be the adjutant that drives the other side nuts. And like, football is the inverse of basketball for all of y'all.
Man, it's awesome hearing that, because I'm like, wow, the program's very much our mirror, like a funhouse mirror, though, given that it's football here and that it's basketball there. But everything that you just described, I certainly remember many instances of that over the years. Let's talk about the program. Let's talk about this year's team. My co-host in the I-80 Club, Jack Mitchell, who was unable to join us today, he did want me to start by asking you this question, and I'm going to read it verbatim. How has Cigs freaking done this? They are 6-0. You just said it. You're good with 6-6. They're already to 6 wins.
Right.
They're climbing in the polls. People they're not even like a dark horse playoff team for a lot of people anymore. People are legitimately expecting this, at least nationally. How has he done this in year one?
Well, I mean, if you haven't followed Indiana, I'll give you the quick summary. One, he turned over the roster. Like is everybody that makes a quick turnaround now in college athletics. What do? You flip the roster. So they brought in some core pieces, obviously, from JMU that were grown-ass college football players that know how to win games. And Tom, the Indiana roster, you all have seen it probably from afar. At the end of the Tom Allen era, obviously there were heights during the Tom Allen era, but things were going precipitously downhill. The locker room had rumored to be lost. Players were leaving. There was not much of a roster that Curt Cignetti walked into. And what roster was left was headed out the door. And so he did an amazing job really just flipping that roster. Brought in adults from JMU, Aiden Fisher in the linebacking core. That's a name you're going to hear a lot. Elijah Surratt on the outside, wide receiver, stud at JMU, brought him in. Brought in their best cornerback, who was a freshman, D'Angelo Pons, hell of a player on the outside. Brought in some guys that are just dogs, adults. Zach Horton, tight end. So a lot of the names that you're going to hear were JMU guys and guys that have come up in a winning culture, know how to win, and have done that for a long time. They complemented it then with a lot of other great pieces. Obviously, Kurtis Rourke was a hell of a find. Guy that was 2 years ago, an all-MAC player at Ohio, has the look and feel of an NFL quarterback when you watch him play. Obviously, blown his ACL the year before, had a little bit of backslide at Ohio. Sid grabs him and said, hey, I can turn you back into the guy that you were before and then some. Why don't we get you ready for the NFL draft? He's been great. They're littered. They're incredibly talented at the wide receiver position. That wide receiver room is unbelievable. People may remember in Nebraska, I don't know, he might show up and he's going to Michigan allegedly on a visit next week. He might end up out of Nebraska. Donovan McCulley, that by many people would say Indiana's at least biggest bright spot from a talent perspective, 6'5" converted quarterback to wide receiver down the stretch last year. He was 8th on the depth chart by week 3. Can't get on the field. Brought in I'm going to get, I believe it's Miles Price and Miles Cross. I forget which one's from Ohio and which one's from Texas Tech, but basically two kids that are just two more studs. You have Keyshawn Williams. You've got still EJ Williams. There's a really, really stacked wide receiver room for a program like Indiana's that is atypical. I would say it stacks up with anybody, like a Nebraska, like I don't want to say Bama, Texas, but I would say in that second tier, the wide receiver room's up there with anybody. So there's talent, man. It's a talented roster. There's still depth missing in spots. And then obviously you do have to acknowledge Indiana hasn't played the world's toughest schedule. Now, I've seen Nebraska fans online already complaining about Indiana hadn't played anybody. And I believe by strength of schedule, actually, Indiana has a better strength of schedule than Nebraska, for what I have seen bouncing around. Maybe it's strength of record. I don't know.
They're very, very close. They're pretty much even in terms of strength of schedule.
Yeah, like I would say, like top end. We'll not get into Dion on this podcast, but like probably Colorado has a more talented roster than anything Indiana's seen to date. But everybody knew. Part of the reason you had to make the move from Tom Allen, coming into this year, was everybody knew Indiana had finally the schedule. And that means we've played Ohio State in the first month of the season, I think, for the last several years. We've always had the early games that just demoralize you. You had soft non-con, and then for the first time ever, you had kind of an easy on-ramp to the conference schedule relatively up until this game. So there were people talking about, hey, you can run off your first six. Heck, we were talking about that last year, that, oh God, if we don't fire Allen, he could save his year next year by not even having that good of a program, but falling ass backwards into 7-5 again. And then we're stuck in this treadmill. So it was a great year schedule wise. And you're going to have this in the new Big Ten for a new coach to come in, set his system, because I'll be the first to tell you, they didn't play great at Northwestern. They didn't play great, especially in the first half of Northwestern. They turned the ball over 3 times in the first basically 7 minutes at Maryland. Mm-hmm. There were places where they could have blinked had they been playing a tougher team early in that game that might have taken advantage. The schedule was just enough to be tested, but also to work out the kinks, and I think that's helped Indiana.
Yeah, so you mentioned the portal. I'm curious, like, did you think that using it to this degree with the large turnover, but also with this many players from JMU and lower levels, like, would work to this level? Like, that's, I think, the thing that I know I didn't buy into in the offseason. It's like, yeah, it's great that you get to set your culture, but also, like, going from JMU to Big Ten football is going to be a bit different. Obviously, I've been very pleasantly surprised by them. What did you think?
I probably like you, Josh, I'm a little bit of a skeptic on, man, it's hard to pull a team together when you got 40, 50 new guys that have got to learn a brand new system, new coaching staff, and get it all to mesh over, really a handful of spring practices, and then you come into camp. And the fact that they've been able to pull that off, what that signals to me, guy's ball coach. And Indiana's got an old-fashioned ball coach. If they can pull it together, I think it also speaks to the staff. I think Mike Shanahan, no, not that one. The tight end from Pitt, no, not the father of Kyle and Super Bowl winner, has done a really nice job with the offense. Tino Sunseri, if you want to remember a guy, is Indiana's quarterbacks coach. And then Brian Haynes on the defensive side. I think they've done an excellent job of just figuring this out. I don't think it's a model that works for everybody. And I don't think you can just say, my friends that I already talked about Purdue, assuming there's a change that's got to happen there in the next year, is the model now you just go get the best G5 coach you can find who's got a little bit of a roster, and you tell him to bring 10 or 11, 12 guys with him and cut some NIL checks. That's the other thing I didn't mention about Indiana is last year Indiana did not have the dollars to compete with the top end of the Big Ten. They went out and changed that. And so there's been an institutional commitment behind Cignetti and a fan base commitment that the one thing about Indiana will back a winner. Like it's not a program that's hurting for donor money, and it never has been across the athletic department. And, if you've got those dollars and you can go find a G5 coach, maybe that's the model. But I'm like you, I'm skeptical that it can work everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me what your thoughts were on the hiring of Cigs. He seems like a coach that if he is your guy, You love him. If he is not your guy, you can't stand him. You probably find him annoying. Obviously the line that continues to resonate is the Google me one. I believe I heard an interview where Kurtis Rourke said that like he literally did Google him. What did you make of the hiring in the moment, and now what as we record this on October 17th? How are you feeling about it today?
Yeah, I will. So I'll admit, I got a handful of guys that I used to write with, and our joke is we're probably as or more plugged in than most national writers to what's going on around the Indiana program, as you all probably have the same effect on Nebraska. So we knew some things were developing in the lead up, and there were some names that had been flying around. Paul Christ was one that we were all freaking out over. That was one that was bouncing around. Was it happen? Was it happen? There's a rumor now that basically he didn't interview well or didn't present well, but allegedly he had a conversation. That could have all just been a smoke screen. You know how those searches go. I was looking for somebody that was a sexy offensive mind. My name that I was throwing out was GJ Kinney down at Texas State, which probably is not a thing that actually would have worked. But I wanted Indiana to just score points again. I didn't really care about anything else. Like I had given up on Indiana being good. I just wanted Indiana to be fun, and that's the only thing I was asking for. Here's my first impression, man. You come out and talk a lot of shit. You better win some games. So,
yep.
I was sitting there going, man, this guy. I was texting with a few people behind the scenes, and I was like, is he really like that? And they're like, it's not bravado. Like it's not something for the camera. It's not something where he's trying to win social points. He's just like that. That's how he talks. That's how he acts. It's not an act. And he's won. But when he first came in, I think we all thought, hey, that's a great hire. It's a great hire. Solid hire, right? Like you get the guy from JMU. Indiana's not been able to make that type of hire to go out and get the hot G5 coach, in the past. Like if you look back at Indiana's hiring searches, yeah, we went and we got Kevin Wilson, who's a position coach. That's probably the best outside hire we made. Obviously, Terry Hepner, if you go back to 05-06, obviously that ended very tragically for Indiana just after a year. Couldn't really see that one through. You go back before that, it was Jerry DiNardo, who had been most recently coaching in the XFL. So Indiana does not have a great track record in the last 20 years of outside football hires. So it was a win. It was a win. I think everybody thought it was going to be a good hire. I don't think anybody would have told you we'll be 6-0 coming into the Nebraska game. And I think if they were saying that, despite the schedule, it was a little bit of cope, like trying to rationalize some of the shit talk. But hey, if you can back it up,
yep,
it looks really good. And, right now he's backed it up. And, I think the persona that he's got is what Indiana needs, of the rid yourself of this loser bullshit that is ingrained into my brain of every time we get a lead in a third quarter, we're going to blow it. Shoe's going to drop. And Indiana needed that. That's exactly what they needed. So
yeah. Definitely. We talked earlier about the skill guys. You mentioned a lot of them that have joined the program. When you think of the offense, or when you see the offense right now, in terms of giving credit to the scheme, the play design, the play calls versus the players, how would you say that balances out? Basically, I'm asking how good are those skill guys? Because I come away every time I watch Indiana very impressed.
Yeah, I would say I'm going to credit to a little bit of both. Now, I haven't. My first caveat here is I haven't been able to watch Indiana full end-to-end on TV this year. I was at the Northwestern game, but I was down in the field, which you know what that looks like. You can't see shit what's going on and what's actually
especially
happening.
at that tiny stadium.
Yeah. So like I'm dusting off. Like, okay, I was watching the FIU game on TV on an iPad. Generally, I think what you see is Indiana's got some really solid route runners and great schemes in terms of the routes that they've got. Rourke throws a really catchable ball. And like, that is not like the, Peyton Ramsey throws a really catchable ball. And what I mean is he's got a noodle arm. I was like, he's got plenty of arm to get it where it needs to go. Now he's not like Mike Penix. That's a cartoonish arm that can throw it, 70 some yards, but throws a really, really good catchable ball, puts it exactly where it should be most of the time. They've got a blend of great route runners and great hands catchers across the board. And then they fit that together with a scheme that basically you watch most Indiana passing play, there are 1 to 2 guys open, like every single time. Like if we're running a little mesh concept, any sort of, they run a lot of crossing routes, as most everybody does in college football these days. And you will see 1 to 2 guys open. Rourke can sit back. And if you don't get to Rourke, Indiana's going to march down the field on you. I think that's generally going to be the case. If you're able to apply pressure, he doesn't move super well. And that's, I think, how you beat Indiana. The other thing, too, is the running game doesn't get as much credit because they spread the ball around. Mm-hmm. But it's a downhill running game, and reminds me a little bit of the Kevin Wilson era with Tevin Coleman, Jordan Howard. Not explosive to that level, but the offensive line was a very, very, black mark in the Tom Allen era. And Bob Bostad came in during his last year. That's the only coach that Cignetti retained, turned that group around, and has a bunch of guys that will lean on you in the third and fourth quarter. And so they do a nice job running the ball. It's a balanced offense. There's not a lot that you see that's gimmicky. It's fairly straightforward, but guys are consistently open, and it's balanced enough that they can just march right down on you in a not all that sexy or gimmicky way, that it's not some crazy concepts that you haven't seen before. It's just, we're going to play football. We're going to play it straight up, and we're going to move it down the field on you. So,
yeah. A similar question that I keep asking, a variation of, and that's like, what did you expect with player X or coach X? Like, did you see this coming with Kurtis Rourke? I mean, through 6 games, through 7 weeks now of Big Ten play, I have to imagine he would be the first team all-conference quarterback as of today, ahead of Dylan Gabriel. What did you expect from him coming in, and has he even surprised you as well?
If you go back and watch some of his tape at Ohio, it's a guy that can play ball. Like, if you went back, the question with Kurtis Rourke was always, how quickly does he mesh? And then is he the same guy that he was before the ACL injury? I think he's more than that. And that speaks to Tino Sunseri has a hell of a track record as a quarterback developer, and has done a really nice job, I think, with him, plus Mike Shanahan and Cignetti as well, of course, who has a background as a quarterback's coach. So they have done a nice job, I think, up-leveling him, and he was already a good player coming in. What gave me confidence is in spring ball. So you obviously got Taven Jackson, who is from Indiana, brother of Trace Jackson Davis, transferred in from Tennessee, as the backup. And then they landed Tyler Cherry, stole him from Duke, was another kid from the same high school as Trace Jackson and Taven Jackson, who's your third stringer. And there was some question at one point, like, hey, are they bringing Kurtis Rourke in for sure to be the guy? Because there was somewhat of a competition in the spring. He ran it going away. Rourke, every time you heard Cignetti basically say, yeah, Rourke looks really, really good, basically every time he talked about it. So there was some optimism, I think, with people that knew that this kid was good. Is he that good? I'm going to be a skeptic. I think a lot of people would point to him as the best player on the Indiana offense right now. I don't know that, and this is not a dig on Kurtis Rourke. I don't know that he's in the top 3 of Indiana's best offensive players.
Wow.
And like, I think if you look at it, Elijah Surratt does a great job. You can make a case for Justice Ellison. You can make a case for guys on that, couple guys on that offensive line. You can probably make a case for a couple other wide receivers, but like, he's really, really good. But what I'm telling you about the Indiana offense is, like, it's not like a clear, obvious case that he's Indiana's best offensive weapon either. Like, it's a pretty balanced attack. So
we're close to a half hour in, and I don't think we've even mentioned the defense so far. And so I feel like it kind of encapsulates the program this year, where it's offense, but the defense is obviously doing enough to continue to get these wins. What do we know? What don't we know about the Hoosiers defense through 6 games this season?
I think this is the major question for Saturday, Josh. And I think if you are going to be concerned about Indiana being a bit untested, it's going to be, where's this defense trending? So started the season incredibly well, but played an FIU team that is a middle of the road CUSA team. did put up like 60, I believe, on Central Michigan the next week. Just a little bit of propaganda. And then played the worst D1 FCS team I've ever seen in Western Illinois. That was a glorified D3 roster of somebody that was sitting right behind them. Charlotte was decimated by injury. UCLA is not a potent offensive attack, but did hold them to 13 points on the other side of the country. There were some warning signs in the Northwestern game in particular. Maryland scoring 28 on you. I don't think that's going to turn too many heads. There's a potent passing attack there, despite forgetting the fella at quarterback that's got the arm, Edwards, I believe. Nobody's going to worry about Mike Loxley scoring 28 points on you. Fine,
sure.
Whatever. When Jack Lausch and Northwestern are moving it on you, you start to raise an eyebrow a little bit. That defense has been very solid in when it needs to get stops, it does. And in that Northwestern game, when they needed to finally say, okay, we're done playing with our food, game's over, they did it. But there were some, what I have seen most with this Indiana defense is they can struggle with a mobile quarterback. Now, I have not watched enough Dylan Raiola for you to tell me if there is an actual threat there with their legs. I presume it's like everything else, and he's going to run when he absolutely has to, and he's kind of going to look like Fred Flintstone since he's trying to emulate Mahomes on everything. But where Indiana has struggled is with a quarterback that has the ability to run, and when they have to both be mindful of that, and there's a little bit of a lack of depth in the secondary that everyone has been concerned about. Defensive line has been generally strong. There was not a lot of pressure on Jack Lausch against Northwestern. Do you attribute that to a program that's historically has had a strong defensive line or offensive line, or do you attribute that to Indiana can't generate any pressure? So I'm going to say there's more unknowns on the defensive side. There are good players back there. Donnell Carr on the defensive line is a monster, massive dude, came in from Kent State. Heck of a player that you will probably notice in that football game. But I think you're going to learn a lot about, one, can Indiana, if Raiola has the opportunity to move, I don't know, you'll have to tell me, will he? I think Indiana will give him the opportunity that if he wants to pick up a 3rd and 7 on the ground, that will show up. That's a little bit where Jack Lausch and Northwestern killed Indiana, is picking up a couple unnecessary 3rd downs. So that's a question. I think that's the big question for Saturday is like, what does it look like when Nebraska's offense has the ball against a defense that has been really good in spots, but has not probably played an offense, I think, as good as Nebraska can be when Raiola, I have seen him play well. And the only game that I watched was the Colorado game. I caught the end of the I've heard it's been trending down since a little bit, or up and down, but that's, I think, the big question is like, can they contain a quarterback if he wants to move? And then 2, secondary is there's D'Angelo Ponce might be the best player on the defense. The rest of it, you have some Tom Allen era holdovers that were fine players. Nothing against Josh Cignetti, for example. But they tend to be a little thinner. And if you lose a guy or a guy gets dinged up, there's an opportunity to exploit Indiana in the passing game, I think, a little bit, though they will play soft and give up a lot underneath to prevent that.
Yeah, so a couple things off of that. First, there's been this stat that's going around over the last couple of days where it's Dylan Raiola and his performance this year versus man compared to zone, and he's way better versus zone than he is man, and I know that Indiana's defense plays quite a bit of zone, and so I know a lot of people around here are like, sweet, this is going to be great, he's going to be back. Going to the leg discussion, so he's been sacked 12 times, so otherwise he only has 7 carries. So total of the year he has 19 carries for negative 78 yards, but he does have a long of 15. He had a run of 12 yards versus Colorado. That was early in that game. I think he has good pocket awareness. He definitely, I think to a fault sometimes, Kyle, he doesn't look to run, and he takes sacks or he doesn't throw the ball away. So, watching Indiana this week, it's like, okay, quarterbacks with movement, we saw it versus Northwestern a couple weeks ago. That really gives them problems. But I'm like, I don't know if that's anything that Nebraska can take advantage of on Saturday afternoon.
That's going to be the question. Like when Northwestern got Jack Lausch moving out on the edge toward the second half of that game, they were running a lot of rollouts, a lot of sprint outs with him. If you go back and watch that tape again, I'd had 3 beers and I was on the end line. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I saw from my vantage point. If Raiola wants to sit back, Indiana's probably going to give him a lot of cover 2, cover 4 type looks and play soft. There's going to be opportunities for him to pick up and say, hey, let me sneak 5 yards here. Just instead of throwing it away or forcing the ball, let me just run over there and make it 2nd and 2 instead of 2nd and 7, or something, or 3rd and 2 instead of 3rd and 7, whatever it is. He's going to have that opportunity. And I think Raiola is going to be a lot of the story of this football game, because if he's really good, like this is going to could become interesting for Indiana. If he looks relatively stinky, maybe like he's looked against man coverage, then I think Indiana is going to be in a positive situation come the 4th quarter. I'll put it like that. So
yeah, for sure. So earlier this week, I heard a stat about Nebraska. Their largest deficit this year was 7 points, and it got me thinking about Indiana. Indiana's never trailed this year in a total of 360 minutes. They've only been tied 71 minutes and 10 seconds, which a lot of that is the early part of the game when it's 0-0. And the majority of those minutes have come in the last 2, right, versus Maryland and Northwestern. What does that mean, do you think, in this game? For a team in Nebraska that has only trailed by 7 points, a team in Indiana that has literally never trailed, what happens if one of these teams gets up by 10 to 14 points, especially if it's early, given if it's Indiana, it means they're going to have the crowd very much behind them. If it's Nebraska, is there some puckering going on? I wonder what you think that could mean.
That's exactly where my mind goes, Josh. It is this Indiana team, they've been hit in the mouth. Like, God knows, the Maryland game, they turned the ball over 3 times very fast.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Indiana forced 3 and out. You want to talk about the defense? Forced 3 and outs. Nebraska or Maryland hardly picked up a yard. So there's been some adversity, but there has not been scoreboard adversity yet. And I think there is a possibility that 52,000 people in that stadium, if all of a sudden Nebraska goes up 10-0, 14-0, there's going to be a little bit of a moment on homecoming of maybe everybody that hasn't followed it maybe as closely this year as everybody else goes, oh shit, same old Indiana, here we go. And you worry about how that mentality, I don't think it will manifest on the sideline. I think Curt Cignetti's doing a good job of that, but like everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And Indiana hasn't really been punched in the mouth. So I think I hate keys to the game. This is all stupid. And I feel like a color commentator in 1995. Oh, what matters is starting fast and the quarterback play. No shit, man. But I really do think in this game, if Indiana starts fast, I think it could be a long day for Nebraska. Yeah. I think if Nebraska starts fast, I think there's going to be a lot of puckering, a lot of lemon booty in that stadium. And I think some players, and I think Indiana's going to get stiff. And if Kurtis Rourke turns the ball over a couple times, then in that situation, it could be a very long day for Indiana the other way. So I think this is going to be a competitive and close game, unless Raiola looks like he's looked, I guess, against Illinois or whoever y'all played last, which I guess was pretty bleak.
So. Rutgers, yeah, the Rutgers game was certainly a struggle. Like, he had his moments. I mean, he's the reason they almost won the Illinois game. He was fine. They were moving the ball against Purdue, but that Rutgers game, it's so interesting, man. If Nebraska played Indiana like a month ago, I don't think anybody would be like, oh God, how's Dylan going to perform? If anything, the question back then would have been, the defense, they're coming off the Illinois game. What the hell happened? But because it's now, everyone's like, oh, what's going on with Dylan?
So I'll put it like this. When I watched Nebraska early in the season, I thought Indiana will be an underdog in that game. Like watching Indiana early versus Nebraska early, I thought 3 to 7 point dog at home. That's fine. That's what I expected. And I think Nebraska, you've watched way more than me. I've watched a passing play or two. You've had one team kind of this and one team a little bit on the rise, but it all comes down to, I think, what does it look like defensively? Because Indiana, I do think, is going to move the ball. Yeah. I think Indiana is going to find a way to move the ball and score enough points to win a game. The question is enough 40 or is enough 28? Because I think Indiana is going to score in the 20s at least. maybe I'm wrong, so.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about the atmosphere and the fans, because you just alluded to it. If things go sideways, maybe a bit early, it could be a negative. Certainly, if things go well, it could be a huge positive. I have been watching and covering Nebraska for many, many years. I have seen them in these opportune moments to turn the program around or proof of concept. This is Indiana's, I would say, first moment for that in the Cignetti era. What are you expecting from the environment, from the fan base? Is there I still need to believe, or I need to see it to believe it, or are people all in? Because I'm just so curious to see what happens to that stadium. Again, if Nebraska, even if they only went up 7-0 or 10-0, what would happen? Because I know what Memorial Stadium has done in these moments, over the last 10 plus years.
So it's the only comp is this is Indiana football, which is more like, what would it be for Nebraska basketball in this sort of situation? So, like, trust me, I've seen it in Assembly Hall when we've had the similar situations. And I distinctly remember a 2015 Tom Crean era Iowa basketball game at home that was the most hostile environment that I've ever been in, and it was a home game for the team. I imagine it might get a little like that at Memorial Stadium. Indiana, it'll just turn, same old Indiana. Let's leave. Let's go back out to the tailgate fields. Let's have a beer or whatever. It's homecoming. Let's go to the bars, for the alumni. Here's my first question, honestly, Josh, is the only time that I can recall in my life as an Indiana fan where that place was packed to the gills with Indiana fans during a sellout. Exclusively Indiana fans for a game that was not Purdue was the Indiana-Cincinnati game in 2021 after Indiana had the COVID season with Mike Penix, finished the year ranked, went to the Outback Bowls, et cetera, et cetera. There was a fervor. This is probably the most excited the fan base has been for a game since that game. And that place was something I've never seen for Indiana football. But there was a nervousness to the crowd.
Sure.
And that game, Micah McFadden, people still talked about a Micah McFadden targeting call in that game that got him tossed. Cincinnati goes on to win. Indiana's season goes to shit. And that's probably the start of the end of Tom Allen. It just took a couple more years. So I think that's going to be in a lot of folks' minds that are coming back for the first time since that moment. I do think what's interesting, Josh, and that I think I've been thinking about is how much of that crowd is going to be Indiana fans versus Nebraska fans that have traveled. And all due respect to how well the Nebraska fan base travels, we all know it. We know they'll get in the building. We know there will be people there. As somebody that is used to Ohio State fans calling Memorial Stadium Ohio Stadium West for a long time and growing up with OHIO chants to the point when I was 12 years old, my dad had to separate me from a 50-year-old Ohio State fan that out of the stadium. Like, I'm very well aware of what Indiana Memorial Stadium can be when it's overrun by opposing fans. Just given by the ticket sales situation, what I know about it, I would be surprised if it's anything more than 80-20 in Indy or in Bloomington, maybe less than that. I don't want to doubt in Nebraska fans, but my question, this is what my brain goes to, is logic, Josh. Like, I look at the rest of your schedule and I'm like, if I'm a Nebraska fan, why would I make the trip this year to the Indiana game when I could go to, Ohio Stadium next week? If I'm going to make a road trip, right? So
correct.
I don't know. There's people that make plenty, but that's kind of where my brain's going, is like, there's not a good, easy flight from like Lincoln.
Very much correct. You got to go to Chicago or Indianapolis, and then you got to drive.
Right, exactly. I was like, I've never seen a ton of Nebraska fans come to Bloomington. So I'm thinking this is going to be an actual Indiana packed to the gills crowd in Memorial Stadium, which will be something that is fairly rare, and the place is going to be juiced and it's going to be pretty cool. But there will be plenty, and people can talk shit to me if I'm wrong about that.
No, I don't. Hey, I don't think you are. I think in the lead up to seasons, we always kind of get a good vibe on, hey, what's the road trip this year? It's not. I don't think it's going to be this game. Now, if we would have all known, if Husker fans would have known in July that this was possible, that it was 5-1 versus 6-0, and that Indiana was the 6-0 team, I think that it would have changed. It maybe would have changed how people approach. But you mentioned, I mean, Ohio State's coming up next weekend. There's still a USC trip for anybody who would want to go to Los Angeles in November, and then Iowa on Black Friday. So I think that you're right. Hey, before we let you go, a couple more. I wanted to ask you about the schedule. You just mentioned Nebraska's schedule. Indiana's schedule, first of all, still 4 more home games this year, which is obviously awesome going into the back half of the season. Washington comes to town. I know Michigan, it seems like that's been the game that everyone's been looking forward to all year. At Ohio State, at Michigan State, and then, of course, horrible Purdue the last weekend of the regular season. I mean, if Indiana gets through this game, the playoff rhetoric is going to ramp up even more. I mean, do you think, like, how real is that, I guess? If they win this game, they're 7-0, and again, they're going to be favored in every game except for Ohio State. Do you allow yourself to dream, or given what you said earlier that you're a skeptic, are you still like, no, I will believe it when I'm watching it on that Sunday morning and Indiana is actually named?
I don't want to characterize myself as a skeptic because I'm in on this team. Like, I was maybe a little bit of a skeptic coming in, and I think my past trauma with Indiana football, like it couches you. Here's the one thing I will say, Josh, is college football in the state that we are in, I think how we talk about it has become so zero-sum.
Yeah.
That it's either for so many programs, and Nebraska is probably one of those programs, where it's either did you win a national championship or not. Now, I'm sure you all at this point would be thrilled and be a success in that room.
People around here just want 8 wins.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, maybe you won a Big Ten championship. Maybe we're just trying to get back to the Bo Pelini years. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what you should be shooting for. We can have that conversation different time. But this is so incredibly fun in terms of the process for an Indiana football fan, for games to matter. I am trying to not let myself do anything more than think about the game that is in front of us. And that sounds like a cliche that a player is saying, but like, I am having so much fun with my wife and I. We're season ticket holders, pulling friends together, people texting us that aren't normally interested in going to games. Hey, like, do you have an extra ticket? Can we come down? Can we come tailgate with you? Each week by week is so fun that I'm trying not to look ahead to that too much. But yeah, it's there. I mean, it's there. It's there. And like, have I thought about a December 19th home game against Alabama with Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan and Kane Womack coming back to Bloomington? You bet your ass, man. I mean, from a realistic standpoint, I think if you go through the rest of the schedule, I think this is I can make the argument this is the toughest game, the second toughest game remaining on Indiana's schedule. I think you set Ohio Stadium versus Ohio State aside.
Yeah.
And like, can you make the playoff and make the Big Ten championship game at maybe 11-1? You can't assume you're going to run the table with that game looming there. Though I think Indiana is good enough to give Ohio State a game. Like, I don't think they're just going to get bulldozed. The games that honestly give me the most nervosa are this one. Probably the next 3. The Michigan game, I think if they get to the point where they're undefeated by the Michigan game, I am skeptical of that Michigan team. Possibly, I think fraudulent, bad, can't score. I think that's going to be a problem against this Indiana team, anybody that can't score. But I think Nebraska is good enough to beat Indiana. Plenty. Washington is a question mark, I think. You have some of that can't score issue, but I think Will Rogers, what he showed, in their last game, the last couple of weeks has looked very good. I am a little nervous about the trip to Michigan State because I think if you're circling a game where every game in East Lansing that Indiana I can ever remember, it's 35 degrees, it's pissing rain, it's kind of sleepy if Michigan State sucks. It's not going to be a juiced environment. You're going to have to bring your own. Like, that's the one where I'm like, if I'm looking at a letdown outside of the big couple games, like, that's one that gives me a little bit of nervosa. I think the Michigan game they'll be up for, and I think they might be the better football team, like, actually straight up. Then you got Ohio State, and then you got to finish against Purdue, which if you're losing to Purdue, we shouldn't be having this conversation anyway. So, I mean, look, it's all there. I'm not letting myself think about it. It's a possibility. basically, this is the litmus test weekend of like, hey, can you beat a team that probably should be a top 25 team? Is it top 25 team if you're looking at the coaches poll? Can you get a win? And then you basically run it back and you play a team of, I would say, a similar or step down level, slight step down next week against Washington. If you can handle your business in that, then let's have the conversation once we get into November. So that's the way I'm looking at it.
Should be a whole lot of fun. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because I know there's a lot of Nebraska basketball fans that'll check this out. Any thoughts on the game when Casey went off back in March? I figured I'd save it for the very end.
Well, honestly, the thing I'm thinking about, man, is I believe the Pacers got him on an Exhibit 10 deal. Right? Is that still? Now I'm looking it up. Yeah, they've got him on an Exhibit 10 contract, and I was like, hell yeah, please. I would love to not have to play against that guy ever again. I was sitting out in Vegas. It was my birthday that weekend. My wife and I were out in Vegas after a work event that I had. And I was sitting watching that. And I was glad that I could go gamble and have a few cocktails afterward. And I didn't have to think about it, too late in the evening. So, hey, but we got another one coming up in December here to start the year. So
yeah, a Friday night game, right? That's a big Fox game.
Friday night Fox game, baby. Fox is getting all the Indiana Nebraska at once. So.
They certainly are. Kyle Robbins, man, this was so much fun. We scheduled this, I think, back in September, and every week I've just been hoping like that both of these teams could keep it up. I'm super jacked for this football game. You will be in attendance. I hope that you have a great time, but maybe you're a little sad at the very.
I got to admit, I won't be. I got a wedding this weekend.
Oh,
so
no.
I had to sell my tickets. This is the one. I'm actually officiating a wedding on Saturday. So this is the one game I'll get to watch on TV all year long. So I'm excited for it. I'll be tuning on Fox like you guys. So.
All right. Well, hey, man, thanks for taking the time. I've always enjoyed your work. Always enjoy your Twitter feed as well as we deal with the dystopian society that we currently live in. Kyle Robbins, thanks so much for joining us today on I-80 Club +1.
Cheers, guys. We'll have a fun one on Saturday. Take care.
Should indeed. Coming up on Saturday morning coffee show. We would love to have you as a subscriber, patreon.com/I-80 Club, and certainly like and subscribe to the YouTube page as well. For Kyle, I'm Josh. We will see you on Saturday. Take it easy.